So I just want to, I don't know anyone who's been to more places across this continent than you. You've been traveling and crisscrossing the continent, and just to show you that I'm not just making this up, where are you and when did you get back to South Africa?
I'm in Johannesburg, and I've been here for about a week. Although next week I'll be in Namibia, so
Yes.
you're not too far off.
Awesome. And you've been doing this for how many years, Michael?
Oh, now you're going to date me. At least 30 plus, though. I started really after law school. I'll talk a little bit about this, but I had a paid internship that USAID funded that took me to the African Development Bank in the late 80s.
Okay. All right.
And,
so
on my own in the 90s. So that gives you.
Okay. So are you going to share a little bit about your journey before you talk about the nexus between energy and Africa? Okay, great. So then I won't spoil that part of your conversation. I will say that, there's some fun facts about you that I maybe will share afterwards. But guys, please settle in. You're getting a chance to meet with one of the leading minds on this continent that is going to share with you about the nexus between energy and agriculture, share a little bit about himself, but he's a trusted advisor to our entire global team. And we feel super fortunate to be able to spend this time with you. So Michael, over to you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Can you all see my screen? Let me just make
Yes,
it.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Take it to slideshow. So jumping right into picking up on Timothy's cue, I did think it was relevant to tell you a little who I am and the perspective that I'm one this morning. So I'm an African-American lawyer by long ago practiced briefly in Miami, Florida. Commercial transactions and cross-border transactions are my area of specialty. But for the preponderance of my career, I've been an economic development practitioner. Born in New York, Michigander, so Midwest. Michigan was my undergrad. Harvard Law School is where I did my legal studies. And I thought to mention, I don't always do this because it's one of those unfinished business things, but for almost 4 years, and COVID interrupted my studies. I was studying at a university called EPFL in Switzerland, one of the leading engineering programs there. Grids, particularly solar-powered mini grids, and the productive use of energy in agriculture. So I'm going to speak to you as the president and CEO of the African Fertilizer and Agribusiness Partnership and chairman of Agribusiness Group. But a lot of the insights I'll share in this academic pursuit. My worldview is as a diasporan, so happy that, hopeful that folks from the diaspora on the call, and that as a key community. Fathers from Nigeria, mothers African-American of Bahamian descent. So I definitely feel like I am qualified to be a diaspora. First half of my life really based in the U.S., second half predominantly on the continent. You asked the question, how long I've been doing this, again, over 30 years. Also have been, when I say doing this, working on providing information about doing business in Africa throughout that period. I'm the author of a number of publications, but two of them are the African Business Handbook, which had various iterations after the first one that was published in 2000, published with John Wiley and Sons, co-authored a publication called Investing Africa, an Insider's Guide to the Ultimate Emerging Market. As mentioned, I've been living on the continent here, based principally in South Africa. since '99, and economic development, and within that, agricultural development has been a core part of my focus. Three areas that I'll just share. Trade facilitation is a core part of what I've done professionally, investment attraction as well. Both transactions between companies wanting to invest one in the other, with governments on destination investment. How do they make themselves as an investment destination? And lastly, of course, in that space, in addition to agriculture, tourism has been an area of focus. Manufacturing has been an area of focus, some healthcare as well. So I thought to, with the brief that I was given, talk first about the work that we do at the I came president and CEO of AFAP, as we call it, about 2 years ago now. In May of next year, it'll be 3. Client of the Africa Business Group, which is the economic development firm that I founded in 2005. So for the last 2+ years, I've had much more of a deeper dive into particularly productive agriculture and particularly the value chain component of the overarching value chain, the value chain subsector. So we're a independent, nonprofit social enterprise. We were founded in 2012. From our inception, our statutory headquarters is Newark, New Jersey, but our operating headquarters has been here in South Africa, in Johannesburg. The first 3 branches that we established were Ghana, Tanzania, and Mozambique. And those 3 countries tend to be corridor countries for fertilizer and input trade into the interior countries next to them. So in Ghana, Burkina Faso, Mali, in in Tanzania, you've got Uganda, Rwanda. In Mozambique, it's Zambia, among them Malawi. We've since grown, and again, in the map that you have before you where it's dark green, those are the countries where we have a physical presence in Southern Africa, along with South Africa, Mozambique, Zambia, Malawi, East Africa, along with Tanzania, now Kenya, Uganda, and in West Africa, along with Ghana, Nigeria. We've had in the past offices in Mali and Burkina Faso, and determined that it was safer for some of the staff to work from Ghana. So we still work in those countries, but from Ghana. We're a growing organization. When I came on board, we were roughly 45, 50 professionals. Now we're 85 professionals spanning those countries. About a quarter of those are based here in Johannesburg. The 3 areas that we work in: market development services, financial development services, and policy development services. The market development services work is really the work that we do with companies that are suppliers of inputs. So inputs, I'm talking about fertilizer, I'm talking about crop protection products, anti-pest type products, and also seeds. Increasingly, as Africa is growing as a market for those products, because we're relatively unique on the continent, companies reach out to us to help them with their go-to-market strategies and how they should develop and access on the continent. We also work in the financial services area. We have a trade credit guarantee product. That product is one where we, in essence, guarantee the suppliers of fertilizer if there's a default by wholesalers whom we introduce them to, who have networks of retailers that they work with. If there's a default by the provision of fertilizer on credit to these wholesalers, we step in and guarantee repayment of at least half of that risk. The aim is that in other parts of the world, fertilizer really is traded with a delayed payment structure. So the fertilizer ships the product, you have the distributor of the product hold the product in warehousing, and they don't have to pay until they sell. On the African continent, because there's not the same level of trust, you have situations where products can't move unless there's cash on the barrelhead. So our trade credit guarantee facility is aimed at de-risking those transactions to get more fertilizer through the value chain quicker to the farmer at a less expensive price. Lastly, we work in the policy area because fertilizer is a regulated product. And also, African governments have dominated this industry for most of the era of trade in at least inorganic fertilizer in Africa. We're promoting the greater utilization and role of the private sector, improve logistics. They'll get product to the farmer on time at good prices. But we need an enabling environment for that. So we work with local governments, we work with national governments, we work with regional economic communities, and we work with the African Union quite closely on these matters. Our methodology, and this is where the value of this is that when you think of how energy might get to a rural area, we believe that the hub agri-dealer, who's the wholesaler, again, of inputs, is a key potential local agri-SME that can help bring, for example, renewable energy, solar technologies closer to the farmer, help install things like drip irrigation that's powered by solar technologies. And so broadly, we work to build the capacity of these agri-SMEs who we call hub agri-dealers. You see at the top, we work with suppliers. Historically, those were large global suppliers, companies like Yara and OCP. Increasingly, Africans produce fertilizer on the continent, and so we're also helping those manufacturers of product to link to logistic channels. And really, our hub agri-dealer network, we consider to be a logistics channel because those hubs have retail agri-dealers who are closer to the farms where they work. And so we facilitate that product flow. Just a little bit more about the why. Again, we don't use a lot of fertilizer on the continent, but that's growing. And so these hub agri-dealers are critical parts of helping us do that. We specialize in last mile delivery. Again, where there's an energy challenge on the continent predominantly is in rural areas. And so understanding what's happening in the villages, the small towns on the continent, if you're interested in this area, is critical. We also focus on logistics. Getting renewable energy technologies to these communities is also a challenge if you're trying to do that as a point of entry. So you do want to understand how products flow to the communities where you want to be. The offtake and market linkages is also key. Yeah.
Mike, this is so important, and I know, and I'm sorry to stop your flow, but this last mile delivery specialist dynamic, because I am so passionate about rural areas and people outside of the cities getting access to. Can you just unpack that a little bit and how you guys have developed this?
Sure. So there's a few slides in where I'll talk about the structure of agriculture on the continent. And again, today we're talking about energy and ag. So it's key to understand that 80% of the farmers in Africa are smallholder farmers. That means they're farming on 1 to 2 hectares.
Oh, wow.
And so they're small entities in villages, in rural areas, feeding the continent
Wow.
to the degree that we're doing so. And I say that because we still, as Africa, import between $35 to $55 billion worth of food every year. So there's many who, and I'm in that camp, say that if we made more of the food that we eat, we would have much more capital locally for other investment. But when you talk about last mile, it's that space, if you will, from the port to the village.
Okay.
Because what fertilizer producers do typically is they deliver their product to the port. And then there's a value chain, if you will, from the port to the farmer, where you have a lot of small middle people typically, because you don't have these hub agri dealers or enough of them. We've worked with close to 600 around the continent in the countries where we are, but arguably there's a need for thousands because they make it much more efficient to distribute products. The value in our conversation is that any type of energy technology is quote unquote a product. It's an input into the production of food. And so you're going to need a logistics plan to just get the materials that you're going to install to market, because it's not like there's a Walmart or something like that, or Costco where people are going to go and just pick up these things. So the hub agri dealer for us, we're building in that direction.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to get into the weeds of this. I don't think I need to talk too much about the credit guarantee. I'm sure you can get the slides that I have from the organizers if you're more interested in that. I'm just 2 seconds on this slide. The other aspect about African agriculture at this time is that it's predominantly rain-fed, which means that unlike in the US, for example, where there's significant irrigation, on the continent, most of your farming happens when it's rainy season. And so you plan your interventions around the seasons. Now, the challenge with that, and this is where renewable energy comes in as a solution, and electrification broadly, is that we're in a period of climate change, and climate impact is intensifying. And so it used to rain in a given month years ago. Now it doesn't rain in that month. So if you're a farmer and you can't farm because you don't have access to water, without that, that's a major constraint. So we're promoting, among other things, irrigation. And pivot irrigation is big, central pivot irrigation, but drip irrigation is a lot less expensive, and also something that we think is something that we should be developing on the continent. And you can use renewable energy, you can use gravity. There's other ways to drive this, but renewable energy is a key one. The bigger context in which we're talking about this subject is really around sustainable agriculture. And so we come up with 10 key drivers that we think are important if you're going to look at this area. So extension and improved application and use of inputs is critical. Smart subsidization, again, agriculture globally is subsidized. On the continent, those subsidies in terms of the volume of capital typically concentrate around fertilizer. It's key also to talk about soil health. I won't get into, I don't know how many of the listeners are agriculturalists, but you've got inorganic fertilizer and you've got organic fertilizer. One of the challenges on the continent is that the soils are degraded both by poor fertilization use and then also poor methodologies for farming. So you need to put nutrients back into the ground. I wanted to circle digitization in agriculture and mechanization in agriculture because those are two key areas, again, using digital tools. And we all know that there's a proliferation of tools that one can use for efficiency in business. If you don't have electricity near the farm gate, you can't use that. So that's an area. Mechanization, again, beyond tractors, there are a number of different implements that help you make farming less of drudgery, if you will, because farming with a hoe is no fun. And young people on the continent are not excited to go and farm like their grandparents did. I talked about irrigation. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's a key area. Upstream aggregation and offtake, again, one of the areas, and this is if I was a young person, I was thinking about I want to do something in Africa, agriculture, and I want to do it. Potentially, there's a core energy focus, but the real focus is using tools to create marketplaces so that the farmers have access to markets. Roughly 40% of all food produced on the continent spoils because the farmer doesn't have a place to sell it. And all the farms, let's say we're all producing tomatoes, and all those tomatoes, we don't have markets for those tomatoes. So having a way to ensure that product can be aggregated, again, brought to a cold chain or cold storage facility, ideally, and then sold is key. So I won't go into all of these, but I'll get into, again, what do you use electricity for to improve your agriculture? Electric fencing is one. I was in Eastern Cape a few weeks ago, and one of the banks here in South Africa called Land Bank that supports emerging farmers said, unless you have your area fenced in, we can't provide you with any funding. And so having a fence and then having a fence that keeps animals and burglars from getting through it is key. So having an electric fence is important. I talked about the electricity-driven irrigation, livestock watering. There's very unique today modern methodologies, for example, for poultry farming that use electricity to move the poop, to bring in the water, launch their crop drying, grain grinding and milling, aeration, water pumping, refrigeration, which is critical, ice making, post-harvest processing. Again, if you can process the products that are produced closer to the farm gate, what you do is add value for the farmer, funds in their pocket, but also you have a product that has a longer shelf life. And so now the farmer is more likely to get a return on their investment. Some other areas that are areas where one benefits from having electricity close to the farm, cleaning and sanitation, the higher value products. If you're using a greenhouse, again, you're trying to control temperature in that space. Crop drying. A lot of the cash crops on the continent are sold dry. So if you can accelerate the drying process, you reduce the risk of having poor quality products, and you can increase your return on that investment. Poultry processing, tremendous uses there. As I mentioned, coffee is another key cash crop where there are many uses there. Rice is another staple crop on the continent. And again, increasingly, countries are trying to produce their own rice because we import a lot of rice, and using that, some of the waste from different products in the agricultural value chain to make sure that you're able to dry your product is key. And then a lot of areas around water reticulation, water pumping. These are just some more types of resources: crop drying, ice making, cold storage, grinding, milling, water pumping, using, again, different energies as well. We think of solar because the continent has abundant solar resource, but it also has wind, biomass, and there's also geothermal, particularly in the East Africa to Southern Africa area. One area that's growing, and again, there arguably could be SMEs and MSMEs in the US who are working on tech that's valuable, and that could be transferred to the continent. This is probably 3 or 4 years old, this slide, so I'm sure that there are other companies involved, but again, farm management software, precision agriculture. I talked about the importance of creating marketplaces. Drones have made a huge impact. Again, even as a deterrent from crop theft or livestock theft, you can use drones to survey your land. You can also use it just for surveying the property, determining where the property lines are. Sensors, which are important. Again, on a different farm, you have the emergence, but there's not a lot, but I think autonomous mechanization where you're actually putting a tractor in the field and it self drives. There are large commercial farms in places like South Africa testing this type of technology. Plant data analysis, again, mapping. When one talks about soil health, you're talking really about or aligning with soil health, bringing inputs that are like the right food for the particular soil that you have or the particular crop that you have. A lot of work is happening in that area. And then smart irrigation and then animal data. So again, when we talk about energy and agriculture, we're also talking about tech. So it's not just necessarily I'm an engineer and I can bring in solar technology or hydro technology. One of the key areas that is missing on the continent today is a demonstration of these technologies being used. And so having more demonstration zones and demonstration projects is critical so that the farmer and others in the supply chain can actually see these technologies in action. Well, I would say not dissimilar to the US, but definitely here, if you're a commercial farm and you're using these technologies, you don't often readily make available, let's say, field trips for people to come and just look at the technology that you're involved with. And that means that those smaller farmers that predominate the African agricultural sector don't have access to the technologies that I was just sharing. And so utilization is low. But if you had that, you'd address poverty because in many ways you'd be empowering a broader group of farmers to adopt these tools that are key. Cold chain is a critical one. Just things spoiling because it's hot in many parts of the continent. And so you have a very short shelf life for that food. Enhancing food security, again, same thing, longer shelf life, get the food from the farm to the markets. Improving electricity access has many other benefits outside of agriculture for education, small things like just charging a phone so that the person has access to communications broadly. You stimulate local economic development, you reduce dependency on public assistance. In South Africa and in some other countries, but South Africa definitely has a very strong public assistance program where if you're unemployed, it's a social safety net. You get an allocation of funds monthly. Well, if you had the ability to create enterprise that was income generating in your community, you wouldn't need that assistance or as much of that assistance. There's also a need to show the efficacy of renewable energy. It's again, for around a decade, I've focused in this sector, and I sometimes ask myself, are we making any progress? Because we are, but the issue is that the population on the continent is growing faster than the deployment of the technology. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but we have a continent of a bit more than 1.2, 1.3 billion people. And in the next 25 years, it will double to over 2 billion people. And how do you keep up? Because that means for all the electrification that you're doing, there's more electrification that is needed. And again, there's many job opportunities with skill development that is in this space, both in the ag side and the energy side. And so if you have the demonstration projects and zones, that helps you. I'm not going to get into all of these publications, but again, my thought was that my presentation would also be a resource for those listening and those hearing it on tape. So these are some publications that deal with this issue of the nexus between agriculture and energy. One of the key ones that I wanted to talk about, and it's now, and this is for the research-minded folks who are listening in, the production of green ammonia through electrolysis, which basically means you have sun, water, and you're creating green ammonia, which then you can create a nitrogen fertilizer. And the value of that is that you can put that unit in a remote landlocked place or land-linked place, and now you have fertilizer much less expensive than if you bring it into a port, the nearest port, and you truck it there. In our research, the cost of fertilizer, I'll say 40% of the cost of fertilizer is the transport cost. I'll say African farmers, smallholder farmers use, let's say, 20% of what the global standard utilization of fertilizer is, and partly it's because the product is deemed too expensive. So this modular green ammonia site that a company called Talus Renewables built about 3 years ago now in Naivasha in Kenya, for us is like a huge game changer. We're working with them to see how theirs is an anhydrous product, which is basically a liquid product. And most farmers are used to using pelletized product. So to pelletize the liquid product is quite expensive. And so you lose some of the economic benefits. So we're trying to see how can you use that for small farmers cost effectively and safely. Ammonia is a dangerous product, chemical, if you don't use it properly. On the left side and the bottom, and I'm not sure again if there are academicians with us and people who are also working on innovation, but this was a meeting organized by the International Fertilizer Association and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Marrakesh, Morocco, at the beginning of the year. And we were all involved in different aspects of the fertilizer value chain, but most of the people in that picture were developing distributed low energy fertilizer production technologies. And Bill and Melinda Gates was one of the entities that's trying to see how to bring those technologies to market on the continent. Lastly, and this is something that we'd be happy to explore, we do learning journeys. And so when we had in Nairobi earlier this year, the launch of the African Union's Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit, we took participants out to see the Talus plant and did a tour, and everybody got to better understand the technology. But this to me could be a big game changer because, again, you're bringing, in this instance, renewable energy to rural areas. You could also run lines from the solar farm that's there and electrify a village that might be nearby. A lot of potential there. In terms of opportunities for minority business enterprises, where expertise exists, there's always a need to, I think, in the current environment, explore ways to introduce those technologies to the continent. There's an opportunity to trade products or license technology, productive use initiatives. There's an area of work called the productive use of energy. And the idea is there are many different industries and activities that can be done if there's electricity in a community, and you cannot do those if there's not. So if you followed that doctrine and did a little homework, you'd see a lot of different areas that one might focus on. I talked about the need for demonstration projects. So one might say, well, I'm going to help build and develop demonstration projects. There's also a need for training. Years ago, we reached out to ABE, the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And the traction was, and this was before I joined AFAP, this was through ABG. There are engineers and there are professionals who have experience in energy companies. Might there be opportunities for them to use that knowledge on the continent? I wanted to just highlight, and hopefully Eugene Faison, who's the founder and CEO of D-Grade Energy, will join us. Their initiative, which is a array. This is just one of their products, the Solar Cube, but a solar-powered refrigeration unit. We met almost 10 years ago now. They have a demonstration facility at the University of DC's model farm just outside the Beltway. And years later ran into each other in Tanzania. And we're now looking to see how we can collaborate to bring the solar cool cube technologies to the continent. What I think is interesting and instructive about that work is that Eugene, I won't say he started out, but he took advantage of his presence in the greater DC area to reach out to the ambassador for Tanzania to the United States. And that helped him make connections in the country. And I say that illustratively as often, if I'm a small business, minority business, if I'm not on the continent, how do I make my first contact to know where the opportunities are? It's to utilize the embassy community as one of your US-based resources. Attending conferences, again, I'll talk about this a little bit more, but one can't be too informed. It's critical. Build proof of concept. I did want to flag the fact that the land grant universities are great potential hosts for the utilization of your technology or products, so that when you're talking to potential partners or people in potential markets about what you're doing, you have the proof of concept. I mentioned about engaging U.S. embassies. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention the Prosper Africa program, which is a USAID program that is facilitating two-way trade. And so there are many tools that can be utilized through that initiative to work in Africa. Some of the challenges and barriers that exist, it takes time to develop knowledge of any given market. So being focused is key. International expansion is also expensive. There's no shortcuts there. So you also want to try and be efficient in what you're doing. Africa's markets in this space are emerging. So if you're talking about the agricultural sector, it's mostly small businesses. So those small businesses are going to struggle to buy your good or service. So many of the projects that you would pursue would be donor funded or government funded or both. So one has to be, I'll say, selective in what you pursue, and really focused on how does this get paid for. Language can be a barrier as well. Probably half of the countries on the continent speak French or Portuguese. So there's if you're not fluent in those languages or have people that you can work with who are, that narrows the market for you as well. Partnerships are critical, I should say. So I've said this in other forum platform as well. As much as one is interested in working on the continent or with the continent, there's a growing community of Africans, either recent immigrants or first generation, who are in the US, who to me should be considered as partners because they know their way around their home country minimally often and have relationships, et cetera, that are valuable, more so than just packing up one's bag and coming to the continent or coming to a conference, meeting people and trying to turn that into the stickiness that's needed to actually do business. Leverage universities. Again, there's a growing number of universities, both HBCUs and PD, what do you call it, predominantly white institutions, BWOs, that are also focused on Africa. And so to couple your product, your research with them, and see how when they're many times they have projects that are operating in a given country. They have academic partnerships that can help you. They may have students from the continent who might be an intern in your company and give you insight that way, link you to people that they know that way. But they're excellent resources. I mentioned the embassies, also the U.S. government. Cynthia spoke before I did. She, I'm sure, talked about the plethora of resources that are there, and they're there really to help promote U.S. exports. So, Department of Commerce is one of your key friends in this space. Department of Agriculture as well. Move as a consortium and association, and I'll say size matters. Trying to penetrate any international market on one's own is quite complex. More so with Agribusiness Group than with AFAP. We spent a lot of time hosting delegations from developed countries like Germany, the UK. They would come as a group, and then find opportunities, but take advantage of economies of scale on the flights, to take advantage of the information sharing that happens when you're in a group, the gravitas that your arrival in the country gets as a group, rather than as an individual company. Networking is critical, and there are a number, again, of conferences, both in the U.S. And on the continent, that by participating, again, you're networking, you're getting access to knowledge, information, and you're finding out where the gaps are. I have about 10 minutes left, and I'm almost getting to a point where, Tim, you can ask me a few questions if you have them.
Yeah.
What does the future look like?
Thank you very much.
Let me do these last two quickly.
Sure, go ahead.
Energy access is critical to food security, because again, the cold chain, the actual farming itself becomes much more efficient. And Africa has abundant energy potential sources, as well as the fossil fuel resources. And to me, all of these will need to be exploited in the balance of the 21st century to industrialize the continent. If I'm a minority business, if I'm a smaller business, partnering is key. The university linkages, partnering with what I'm calling American Africans, doing needs assessments. I think the key point of anyone in this nexus is that more than anything, you're a problem solver. You're really trying to address a gap. And if you have that mentality, I think you can be successful. It's a process that takes some time, so one does have to have patience. Embassies, resources in the U.S., the World Bank, the IFC, which is a part of the World Bank, U.S. government. And again, what also is emerging is that beyond just federal government, states are starting to have, and I'll say they've had, but I think there's growing interest, activities, and even some cities that focus on doing business in Africa that can be leveraged. I know the state of Florida actually has an office in Durban here in South Africa, and that office is principally to help companies in the state to find opportunities on the continent, use those resources, adopt a learning attitude. Oftentimes one doesn't want to give away anything. I got a contract, you got to pay me for everything. But if you are willing to explore free or low earning opportunities to develop a track record on the continent, that can help you significantly. Also look for grant and challenge opportunities. And there's the African Enterprise Challenge Fund, which is one that comes to mind that for a number of years had a strong focus on the energy ag nexus. But you're looking for capital that is not a loan, not investment that necessarily dilutes your shareholding, but allows you to get to the continent, to try your initiative on the continent. Those are key. The market, and I talked a little bit about this. I think this is key. We'll have $1 trillion market. This is according to the African Development Bank in a few years from now, 5. We're importing this 35 to 55 billion. So there is money in this space on the continent. A quarter of the arable land in the world is in Africa. And so this is definitely potentially a very lucrative sector. I mentioned, though, most of your farmers are small. They need improved technologies and farming methodologies. I think the entrepreneur who's interested in Africa's big exercise is, how do I navigate these trends and find a niche for a market? And this population doubling is really 2 billion, not 1 billion. And just to give a sense, I didn't talk a lot about this, but another area where electricity is key is in hydroponics and aquaponics. And I mention that because you've got 52 cities with over 1 million people today. So urban agriculture is another growth area. So if you determine, hey, I'm not real keen to be out in the rural areas doing my thing, there's value to being in cities, large cities, producing agriculture. And again, you need continuous supply of electricity for the reticulation of the water and the nutrients. And many African countries in the urban areas still have challenges, even when there's grid, with power outages. We had load shedding for a number of years. So you can use these tools that we've talked about in terms of energy tools, even in the urban areas. And then I talked about climate change impacts, drought, intense heat, floods. So irrigation, cold chain, mechanization, water reticulation, processing are all key, and they all go hand in hand. So to me, the future of activity in this space will only grow. The opportunities to bring new technologies, methodologies, research are there, but it is definitely something where partnership matters. Going it alone, one can struggle to make the return on what you're doing. To me, to make it worthwhile as a business activity. There's one slide I'm trying to see. I want to just speak to what we can do for training and capacity building. We're working in the green ammonia space. We have a presence in West, East, and Southern Africa in terms of different countries. In concert with these wholesalers that we work with, hub agri-dealers, we're working with governments, universities, development partners. And we're interested in improving energy innovations and bringing those to market. We're open to collaboration and discussions, but I will say very candidly, because we're a not-for-profit entity, we're looking to always make sure that the things we do are covering their costs, and ideally, we're even looking to see what else we can do to create additional revenue streams so they're income generating. Learning journeys, market research, training, partnership facilitation, demonstration, project support, and market entry support are areas that I'll leave you with that potentially AFAP may be able to help you with. Some of our partners, just a slide, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, man. We really appreciate it, Michael. You could do a full day on your own. We are really, really grateful for the rigor, for the work that you've put into this. And, I want to make sure that everybody listening knows that we will make these slides available because of the deep, immersive nature of the content that you shared. When we look at the future, there are a couple of questions. I saw that Tubani has a question. So before I go into anything I want to share, let me pass it over. We got Bongenkosi, who has a question. Tubani has a question. We've got about 6 minutes before our next speaker, and we've been laser focused on time because we want to maximize your time. While Tubani is queuing back up, Bongenkosi, can you please share your question?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Timothy, and thank you, Mike, for the thought-provoking presentation. Just a quick one. I'm not sure if I missed it somewhere in the presentation. In terms of the organic and inorganic fertilizers, what is AFAP stand on that? I know this because in most cases, and inorganic rather, you'll find that is easily accessible, maybe cheaper, but we also know the long-term effects of it, and how to then small farmers access the organic, if I may put it that way.
Sure. So we're very bullish on organic fertilizer. The real issue is that you have more well-financed inorganic fertilizer producers. And it's only recently that you've had what I'll call commercial scale organic fertilizer producers coming to market. We work with both in all the regions where we exist. And in fact, if you talk about best practice, and this was raised at the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit, optimally there would be a blend of the organic fertilizer, which puts nutrients back into the soil, and the inorganic fertilizer, which does help improve yield. So we're and blending as a methodology of production of fertilizer is growing, because now you're also able to match the soil, you're able to match the plant that you're trying to grow or the product that you're trying to grow with the optimal fertilizer. So there's more blending taking place. So we are advocates on that one.
Awesome. Zuki?
Hello, Michael. Nice to meet you. Thank you for the presentation. I think it was really energizing for me, because the agri space is not what I'm particularly involved in. But when you spoke about solar renewable energy and the agri space, that's when my ears started to shoot up. So I would like more info maybe of how we can connect with these farmers that are wanting to use different renewable energy technologies to help in their manufacturing. And I think you listed a lot of things that were quite interesting for me. Because from my side, I own a company, Orivision, and doing project development, but not necessarily in agriculture, like we are doing in CITES and we are doing in mining and those sort of things. So I think this is an opportunity that I've identified, as well as the supply chain that you mentioned as well, that there's a lot of opportunities there. So that's the information that I would really like to explore on and understand, how do we make these connections? Is there any platforms? Is there any database, so that we know how to engage then with people who require the services?
No, excellent. One, I'm hopeful that that we can have a broader conversation, but what you'll find is that if you talk to provincial government, and again, the energy ag nexus right now sits squarely in the bailiwick, if you will, of governments, because they're the ones either trying to support the farmers to grow. They're the ones who the farmers call if there's a challenge. And so I'm not sure where you're based, but if you were to reach a provincial department of agriculture, or even look at the national level. You also have in South Africa, there's an institution called the Gora Farmer Training Center in Northwest, KGORA, who we've been talking to for a number of years about trying to develop a demonstration facility of different types of renewable energies. So to put them on the farm, their mandate, and they're an entity of the provincial government of Northwest Province, is to train farmers in different ways. So that's an initiative that we'd love to chat with you about bringing off the ground. We've looked at this in the Western Cape. We've looked at it and are looking at it currently in the Eastern Cape. But anywhere where you have communities where the farming is in the rural areas, and even actually closer to cities, because with Eskom's prices going up, again, it's a tool. So electricity itself is a tool. So in this instance, for irrigation, because Southern Africa is water scarce. So whether it's you could be drilling a borehole and then trying to move that water around your farm, you need power, and solar is a relatively cost-effective way to do that. And cold chain. Once you've got the product, you got to keep it from spoiling. So again, in my slides, my contact details are there. But happy to have this conversation. And Tim, you let me know when I get a whole day, and I can get into it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We will definitely, thank you so much, Zuki. We will definitely be coming back to you. And I mean, as I said at the very beginning, you are a leading voice in this space. You represent so much of the hopes of clarity and empowerment when it comes to research and resources and tools. And thank you for your leadership. And we really, really, really appreciate you joining us on this inaugural IAEOZ Summit. Tubani, we have completely run out of time, but I am good because you've been on since the beginning. I'm going to give you one last question before we hand over to our next speaker, who I'm really, really excited about, Marping from Affirma Capital. Final question, Tubani. Can you make it quick for me?
Yes. I just want to be covered. It was already asked to a certain extent in terms of the organic fertilizers and this one with chemical. I want to find out from the market on the USA, what is the preference? Because most of the time you go to Europe, particularly like German, I work with them, they'll insist on the organic. So I want to find out, just to help our farmers decide which approach they'll be actually taking.
So as I said, and I'll just repeat, increasingly in I'll say more sophisticated agricultural markets, although South Africa, if you're from South Africa, is in some corners very sophisticated, it's a blended product. And the product is created, meaning the fertilizer. Sometimes it's purely inorganic. Increasingly, it's organic and inorganic blended, or other times it's purely organic, depending upon the market that you're trying to serve and depending upon the product that you're trying to grow, and most importantly, the soil that you have, because you're trying to think of fertilizer as food. You're trying to feed your soil the right food to get the optimum yield. And so no one rule of thumb can one use if you're doing more sophisticated agriculture. You test your soil, then you match your fertilizer to your soil. And if you want certain nutrients that are organic, you can blend organic in. But it's increasingly getting more sophisticated than just using an NPK or ammonium sulfate or one product. Happy to have that. That is a whole day, Tim, just talk about fertilizer. We could do that. But thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
And thank you for the question, Tabani.
All the best, Michael. Take care, my brother. We really appreciate it. Salute.
All right.
Hamagatli.
Take care.
Cheers.